Welcome, everybody. It's my honor to present Reverend Jon Gilbert Martinez of Christ Church in Des Plaines. He's going to give us a discussion tonight on strangers in a strange land. How can the church stay relevant in today's world of immigration and refugees? We're looking forward to an interesting lecture and maybe some lively discussion afterwards.
Can you all hear me without it, or do you prefer the microphone?
We can hear you.
Okay. So welcome.
What'd you say?
That's terrible. So I hear some of you being like little kids. What's this for? I promise you'll find out what the stars are later. So hang on to them because that'll be an important part. Basically immersing yourself into part of the lecture, and it'll come relevant at that point. So you'll have to put up with me for a few slides before that actually gets around, and we actually have something else that I have. So that's not the only thing you're going to get to play with. You stick around afterwards. We can have discussion, have questions. I want to point out Reverend Jason Moan, who is back there, and he's part of Exodus World Service, which I'll give a shout out to in my PowerPoint. We also have the Community Backpack Program representative, Jada. You see, I always mess it up. So, and George as well, her volunteer, who kind of leads everything. So, and they're just two of the organizations in the area that help not just our local community. Well, Exodus is more refugees, but Community Backpack Program is not just our local kids, but sometimes those local kids are also part of immigrant family or refugee family. So, what's an immigrant? An immigrant who is documented is kind of what it implies. Someone who goes through the vetting process, submits all the paperwork, and gets the documentation from the U.S. to be here legally. And depending what they apply for, if they apply for school or work, then they're able to get those permits. Refugee, and I apologize, I thought it was brighter on there. Refugee is similar to an immigrant in the respect where they are still highly vetted, but theirs is different in the sense where it's usually more of an emergency type system. So, in that sense, when they're vetted and they're needing the help to get it a little quicker, then organizations like Exodus will help them resettle. But at the same time, like immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, sometimes not all their family are able to travel with them together. And I have an exercise that we'll do that won't be necessarily the same experience, but you'll get the idea. Causes of immigration, documented or undocumented, stem for various reasons. And refugees as well. Economic, violence, civil wars, family reunification is part of where they're trying to migrate or they're trying to bring the rest of the refugee family on here. And the list goes on and on and on. So just think of your daily lives, right? We have hurdles every now and then, whether this or that, and you're managing your home and your family. So you can only imagine how this is much more amplified. So, legal issues. The Trump administration, many practices have come into question regarding the detainment and deportation. So if you see there, that's a young girl. That's not a full-grown female, right? And part of the rhetoric we know is they're only sending criminals and rapists and what have you. Well, they're not, as you can see, And sometimes kids do come out their home because the family is so desperate that they want their child to try to have a better future. So they'll send them on their home. There's been little kids who will be sent with someone else, and the people that they pay for don't really care. They just care that they're getting paid to do it. And in Spanish, you call them coyotes. So you can kind of tell what the word literally is, coyote. And why? Because they're just looking out to see what they can find, right? Which sometimes I feel like it gives coyotes a bad name. But, that's the problem with that. And visas can take up to 2 years in some cases. They'll deport a child without an adult. So just like here, she could have been potentially deported without any adult to go with her. So then, are we as a society and as U.S. citizens and our government, are they really doing anything humane within that respect? When they're sending little kids like that, how would you feel if it was your kid or your grandkid in that situation? And we don't have they don't have the option of saying, well, let's see if things get better, or let's do this or that. It's out of desperation that they're doing these things. It's not just because they want to break the law. And it's also a financial aspect that, yes, if you're documented, you have access to thousands upon thousands of dollars. My dad was an immigrant. He came to this country when he was in 4th or 5th grade. He was detained a year back because he was coming from Mexico, and well, their education is not to the level of us. Well, a few months into it, they actually moved him up back to the grade he was supposed to be, because they saw that he was actually intelligent enough to keep up with his grade level. He graduated and went straight into the Army. He served overseas. And some have the misconception that you can become an automatic U.S. citizen after you serve the military, and you cannot. He did not become a U.S. citizen until years later when he met my mom, and my mom told him, I'll marry you, but I'm not marrying you unless you become a U.S. citizen first. So, some of you who are my congregants and got to know me know how much of energy I am, to put it mildly. My mom was a lot more, and she was yay high. So, she sat him down, they did the paperwork, and he was able to get it within a few months. That was back in the late 80s. Now you have to wait years and spend thousands of dollars. That is not counting also what happens when, especially along the border, the southern border, people believe that our notary publics are actual people who have legal expertise. Because in Mexico, you're supposed to have some sort of legal expertise, lawyers or paralegal, to be able to process some of these things. So some of the notary publics along the border will pretend to do that and say, we'll help you with immigration papers. Well, they'll start taking money, and the person will be here, and their visa will expire because they're like, well, I'm in the process. Well, what happens when they realize it was a con? Are we still supposed to be like, well, you need to get in line? They were in line, and they got caught. I know someone personally back home who did that, but the person that was helping her passed away. So then she's like, well, let me call the government to see what's going on with my papers because I don't have that person anymore. And they're like, who the hell are you? They didn't have anything on her. And this guy had already taken thousands from her. So what is she supposed to do at that point? So keep those things in mind. Most of the time, we don't realize that there's more to the story, right? Just like when we're in a situation, we're trying to explain it, we know there's more to the story than what meets the eye sometimes. Economic impact. For one, you may have already heard this in the news, farmers in California are having a hard time because of all the noise, so to speak, on immigration. And it's not just farmers in California, think across our country. Why? Because oftentimes we have folks in our country that will say, well, they're taking our jobs. Well, give me a show of hands of how many of you would take up a farm job. Come on, don't be shy. I sure as heck won't. That's hard labor. So when the argument is said that it's because people are taking our jobs, no, they're taking the jobs that some of us see like, oh, well, it's down there. I'm too good for that job, right? So when they have a guest farm worker visa that they can do, some politicians still make it difficult for those folks. And just like you and me, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to provide for their family. So as a church community, you belong to a church, then what are you supposed to do? What do you do if your church is not doing anything about these issues? And if you're not part of the church, what can you do as an individual, right? So Christ Church U.C.C. just last year started contacting Exodus World Service, and we connected in that sense. We prepared our first kit, which to me was a little thing, but it was huge for our congregation because that was a big thing to be like, oh, we're doing this, right? There's other churches in the area that do this regularly as well. This year, we're going to try a little more, right? Why? Because that's part of it. It's like, okay, we had a taste of it, we know how it works, now let's do more, right? And that's what clergy should be helping. And if the clergy aren't aware of these things, you as a people can tell your clergy person, hey, I heard about this, I heard about that. What are we doing as a church community? Are we just worried about the four walls around us? Because we know there's so many churches, regardless of faith practice, regardless of denomination, that is like, oh, we got to keep it open. But they don't go outside of that. So what's the use of having the four walls around you if you're not going to do anything with it? Would you not rather have no walls and actually still do good in the community? Won't dive too much into this, it's just so you can get an idea. But as of 2016, Illinois had about 400,000 unauthorized immigrants. Compared to the population of the entire state, it was about 22%. Okay? If you notice, our state isn't the one with the most. Okay? My home state comes in second. I could have told you that. So, and most of us know California also has a big population of immigrants, whether documented or undocumented. So, imagine if that 22% of undocumented immigrants, which is the full count, what would that do to our state's economy? What would it be to the services that we have? The restaurants that you visit? Think of whatever, small-time business. You don't know if the person is documented or undocumented. And I'm not just talking about brown bodies like mine. There's even bodies that look like yours, predominantly white, who are undocumented. And what happens too is people take advantage of them. But then on Sunday they're like, oh God, I love you. I love you, God. But during the week, they're mistreating a human being. They're taking advantage of that human being. And so, what did Jesus say? Don't be a hypocrite. And I'm sure if you look at any religious context outside of Christianity, you'll find something similar. Right? So, once again, the main focus for our state is manufacturing. That's where most unauthorized employees are. And again, we have a lot of manufacturing jobs in this sector. So once again, what would happen if all those folks are taken out of there? What would happen to our resources around us? How many of you would be willing, like, oh, I'll go ahead and do a manufacturing job? Maybe some of you did before retirement, because I know some of you are retired just yesterday. But what happens then? What happens? I wouldn't want a manufacturing job. I know that's hard labor. What do? We don't have people lining up, and sometimes there's jobs where they'll offer full-time benefits like farmers in California, and people still don't want the job. Why? Because we know the hard labor that it is. So laws helping immigrants and refugees. Immigration and Nationality Act, which establishes a legal framework for the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and sets the annual limit for refugee admissions. Okay, that's another reason why some refugees also take long to reunite with their family, is there is a very lengthy process that are vetted a lot. You know, when Reverend Jason visited us last year, he emphasized that. They're highly vetted, and it's a long process. It's not like they're just here tomorrow, right? So, the Lautenberg Amendment expedites refugee status for certain persecuted religious minorities. Now, I want you to think of that. That undocumented immigrants, that doesn't necessarily apply for them. And I'll explain a little bit of that further on, because I'll explain to you where it is it's a tactic that's often used in wars, and I'll share it in a moment. Refugee Act of 1980, Framework for Refugee Resettlement. Then, of course, the immigration marriage, right? So we know some folks do marry U.S. citizens, and that's their process of getting citizenship. Unlike my parents, my mom said, no, you'll become a citizen first, and then I'll marry you. And they were together for the rest of their lives, so I don't think that was too bad of a thing. So, and they adopted several of us, so, you know, I give my dad props, personal blurb here. I give my dad props because he married my mom knowing she could no longer have biological children. And she had a teenage son in high school already, and he married her knowing all those things. And that doesn't often happen, whether it's opposite sex relationship or same-sex relationship. People get scared by those things. You know, my sister, 2 teenage daughters, she's like, I'm okay being single. Okay. Why? Goes again with those things, right? And there's also the diversity visa lottery. Think about it. All of us in this room, if we were to apply for that, how many of us do you think would actually get one? Probably none of us. Just depends, right? So, 14th Amendment referred to the citizenship of an individual except for those born from African slaves. Think about that. We don't often think of those things, right? When we cry foul because a certain ethnic group or ethnicity, are asking just for us to recognize the trauma that has been encountered. We're like, well, I have trauma too. We're not saying you don't. We're just saying recognize what our country historically has done to other groups, right? And there's a lot of groups who are not exempt from this, right? We know the Chinese, what happens to them. The Japanese, of course, are indigenous people. So you have all these different things that have helped to an extent. But this also happens in our country. Our U.S. is like, oh, we love helping people. Even those who seem progressive politicians, we'll help you, come on. And then something changes, like, oh no, we got to get you back on there. How would you feel if that happened to you? Let me phrase it, let me change it around, not that they're offering money, but let's say if I was offering you $1 million. I said, Ruth, you qualify for those $1 million, come on down. And Ruth is all excited, it's like, yes, I can do whatever the heck I want now. And then I said, you know what, Ruth? You took too long to get to the podium. I'm taking it away. Now, knowing Ruth, I may not be able to run away from her fast enough, or any of my congregants, right? But what does that do to a person when you're offering them something and it's almost within their grasp and you're like, sorry? How would you feel? Now, did you know that there's a high amount of U.S. citizens who are in Mexico undocumented. And current president, because of everything the U.S. has been doing, decided recently that, well, maybe it's time we start doing the same thing the U.S. is doing and start vetting out those who are there without permission, who are not paying taxes into the Mexican government, and who, I don't know if you have social media, but if you look on social media, there's been a few videos of privileged folks who moved to Mexico to retire and create chaos, where it's like, no, this is my space now. No, you're a foreigner in that country. There's one where she moved into one of the tourist destinations, and she moved into a condo basically next to a famous restaurant that's been there for 3 or 4 decades. Well, now that she's living there, she's like, the music is too loud for me. So she put in a complaint with the government for them to shut them down from playing music. That's a big part of that restaurant's identity. So now the locals and even some tourists are like, hey, that's not okay. So that's a legal obstacle that they're encountering right now. There's another video of a lady, don't know that she was from the U.S. She was your ethnicity, right? Could have been in Canada, could have been here, could have been another English-speaking country. But she's like, oh, so-and-so allowed us to rent this space, and it was for the eclipse. So you can't be here. And they were trying to explain to her, like, hey, we're citizens of this city. And this is a public beach. Anybody can go in there. And she's like, no, you can't. And then she gets in the face of this little kid that she's about 12 years old. And I was like, keep an eye on that kid. She's going to be very vocal as she continues to grow. And this lady goes and gets on her face and basically tells her to go away. But I'm sure if she belongs to a church community, she'll be back in church when she gets back to wherever she lives and be like, yes, Jesus, I love you. Yes, God, I'm following you. Yet, if we follow Scripture, it tells you we're supposed to welcome everybody. We're supposed to be nice to everybody because you never know if it's an angel. You never know if it's Jesus himself. You just don't know. So keep that in mind. Did any of you know that? Yeah, most people don't. And Mexico's not the only place. Think of a lot of Latin American countries and European countries where it's cheaper and your dollar goes further. There's going to be a big chunk of our U.S. citizens there. Yet, when it's reversed, what happens? So, Deuteronomy, cursed be anyone who deprives an alien, an orphan, or a widow of justice. All the people shall say, Amen. Tells you right there. If you're a Christian, right? Tells you right there. What are you going to do? Apologies. In my computer at home, it actually looked brighter than that. Because even my husband's like, yeah, it looks good. I'm like, okay. And now it doesn't look that great for you all, so I apologize for that. But in talking about justice, Northern Illinois Justice for Our Neighbors, JFON, if you're not familiar with that, that is part of the United Methodist Church. And that is legal services, free legal services for immigrants. Okay. Apparently, they also offer like child care services, but their main thing is doing legal work, free. So there are church-based organizations that do this work. So other churches don't really have an excuse not to start something, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheels are already out there. There's multiple versions and sizes. Choose where you can help. And if your church is not going to do anything or you don't belong to a church, you can contact those organizations and say, hey, how do I become a volunteer? How can I help? at Exodus World Service annual dinner, we saw an array of stories. And I took some of my congregants and 2 of our staff members. And, you know, most people, at least I'm one of them, that I don't really like to dress up. And it's like, oh, here we go, and then it's a large event, so you know there's going to be traffic. I was really thankful that our table was towards the back, by the doors, because we're like, I told our congregants, I'm like, I drove you, better get up and run to the car. Because let's face it, most of us don't want to deal with traffic, right? But all of us, whether we dragged ourselves to go or not, it impacted us with the stories that were shared and the history of how Exodus World Services started. So those are important things to do. If you're going to give to an organization, research it. Find out. How did it begin? What is it doing now? Is it living up to its mission and vision? And if not, maybe that's not the organization you want to support. So Hebrews 13:2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Think about that. What would happen if somehow later you recognized or found out that that individual was an angel that you helped? Or maybe the person you helped will say, oh, that lady Holly, she was an angel sent by God. See, it doesn't just go one way. It can go the other way. And maybe that person at that time, that's what they're needing. Reaffirmation that God is with them. Because there are times, maybe you've been there, where you're like, where is God right now? Am I alone? And you just need a little something to say, I'm still here with you. I'm still on the journey with you. I haven't left you. I've been there several times. Because even as clergy, I'm no different from you. The only difference is what my job is. Right? Nothing else. So, Exodus World Service, and Jason, you'll recognize that straight from your main page, is they provide packs, welcome packs, for families that are resettling in our area. And many of the folks who do help our congregations, they give you a list of all the items that you collect. Once you collect it, they'll contact you and tell you, okay, like for us, an example, for Christ Church, we had a choice of 2 different families. Now, even then, I wish we would have 2 kids, and we could have just said, well, take both. But we only have 1 kid. So what do you do at that point, right? There was a couple, and then a mom with her kid. Can you guess which one I chose? Most of us have that soft spot, right? It's not that we don't care about the 2 adults, but there's a kid involved. And we can only imagine what that journey was for that kiddo. And the congregant who led that effort and I delivered it the day before Thanksgiving. And it humbles you to go into their place. And honestly, I was a little jealous because I said, can I stay and live here? It was a really nice condo, right? But it took her so long to get it. And it was really nice. I was like, maybe we could sell our house. But her kiddo was so happy, even though he had a cell phone. He was so happy because one of the things that was on the list was an alarm clock, right? Because not everybody will have a cell phone, depending how long they've been here as well. Well, apparently that morning he had been trying to get his mom to buy him an alarm clock. And he opened it right away. She's like, you see, aren't you glad I didn't buy you one this morning? And he was trying to set it up, right? But it was interesting because the Exodus liaison that went with us, my congregant and I was thinking we're just going to go, here you go, welcome to the country, see you later. It wasn't that. It was, welcome to the country, I'm glad we could help you. And then we turned around and it's like, we're going to help you put everything away. And she's like, you don't have to do that. She was just so delighted that we have brought those things to her. And literally, when you looked in the apartment, besides the basic stuff that Exodus provides, like sofa and beds, and probably a few other things, right? But what stood out the most to my congregant and I, which is your daughter, Laura, was their suitcases. Because they had just moved in. They didn't have tons of boxes like most of us. We're like, how am I living with all this? But she was so happy that we took time to spend with her. And she's like, well, I don't have anything. She goes, can I give you at least water? See, even then, being extremely humble and happy that we provided what we did. And to me, and probably to you, you're like, that's really not much. But to her, it was the world. And it doesn't end there, because Exodus continues to journey with them as they continue to settle in. It's not just, here's a welcome kid, we gave you some furniture, we'll see you later. No, because then they have volunteers who will meet with them weekly. Then they have where they can also help the kiddos with homework. It's a whole bunch of things. It's not just a one thing of like, okay, we went through the drive-thru, we're done with it. No. Those are the type of organizations that Exodus, for example, does have a Christian foundation that we should be helping. And if you're a congregation or you belong to one, or you have deep pockets, I don't, but some of you might, is with a couple of thousand, you can help big time when you donate to Exodus. I took a picture, but I didn't put it on here during the gala because I was like, okay, I got to remember how much is what. Because that helps me as a pastor and a church leader say, hey, we need to work on these things so that we can do better, so we can continue to grow. And those things are important. And if this is something that interests you, I don't know if Jason brought any cards or anything, but you can always reach out to Jason and he can give you more on that. And if you belong to a faith community, that's another way to get your faith community to continue to do something. So here's some of the things for Exodus. Hospitality is one of their values. Welcoming the stranger, the refugee, into our lives without reservation. Matthew 25:35. Dignity. It's important. How many of us don't appreciate dignity? Upholding the value and dignity of all people as image bearers of God, regardless of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or social group. And I don't know if Jason remembers or not, but that was one of my first questions. Is I asked him, I said, are you inclusive? And knowing where I graduated from, he's like, I know what you're referring to, and yes, we are. I said, so I can get my congregation to support it. That's also important. You want to support an organization that does not discriminate. Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Think about that. Okay? I told you the story of the mom and the son. Well, they have now support, right? She has a job where they can provide food. But she saw us as being thirsty, climbing up, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 sets of stairs, back and forth with several things. And she's like, you look thirsty, here you go, right? We were strangers to her. But Exodus was one of the first contacts, and they welcomed her. She was a stranger. And now she's part of that Exodus World Service family. So, here's where your plug is. The Community Backpack Program is a program that every week delivers to some children in our district. Okay? The social workers identify these kiddos, and then through the community backup program, there's also faith community partners that help. Every week, they stock up those backpacks, they deliver them to the schools, and the kids take them home. Now, the food that's in there is basically for that one kiddo for the weekend. So if there's 3, 4, 5, 6 other people in the home, sorry, they might be able to share depending what it is, but really it's for one. And it's not because the program doesn't want to feed everybody. Because I know that's one of the main concerns is like, how do we reach all these kids who are hungry? They can only do part of that job if we help. Self-help closet and pantry. How many of you are familiar with it? Okay, I expected pretty much everybody to be. Can you tell me where it got started? No, you lower your hand. You lower your hand too.
First Bible.
Yes, First Congregational Church of Des Plaines, which is a sister U.C.C. congregation. But they started there decades ago. And that picture in the background is from that beginning. Humble beginning. Okay? And look at what it's developed into now. They serve a few hundred families every month. What does that tell you? Are you hungry when you go home? Do you worry about what's going to be on the table? Most of us don't, right? Now imagine if you're a kiddo, or you're the parent to that kiddo. What do you feel? Knowing that you are trying and trying, but you can't provide much for that kiddo. I know for me, it would break my heart if we weren't able to provide for my son. And so it's important to support these organizations because they literally feed the stranger. And I will tell you that the first time I went to, because another plug in there is, I was recently inadvertently welcomed onto the board by someone who threw my name in. I won't mention it because she's sitting in the back of the room. But as part of my job on the board, I took on with another board member to move the board from paper trail to a digital trail. And part of that effort was for me to go and evaluate how the volunteers are doing their job, right? It wasn't to give them a grade, and I made sure they knew that. It was like, no, I want to see what you're doing so that I can be able to help put the system together. And those of you who are in my congregation, they're moving into Greece. So it's not a program I don't know. But in doing that, I was amazed at how these ladies remember almost every single person's name, what's going on in their life. I was like, how do you do this? They're like, we just remember. That takes you a second to be like, wow. And they shared a couple of stories from, some time back that I was like, how do you keep it together? As clergy, we're often kind of helped in that process, right? Through our education, through mentors. But in the pantry, I was like, how do you support each other? And they do. They talk to each other. They lean on each other when they're helping these folks. And to me, that is genuinely helping someone. When you take the time to learn their names. There was one mom that came up with a baby, and the lady that I was sitting next to was like, oh yeah, her baby, has had multiple surgeries, and she was just born a few months ago, and she gave me the date when she was born. And I was like, okay, that was a lot of information. Would you be able to do that? I'm sure, with time, right? But think about it, how much love they're sharing. So, at this point, it's not start time yet. Just so you know, this is one of the first that we're going to do. And it's going to take a moment, so bear with me. Yeah, we just slide so that it can. Do another one. Yes, I don't know.
How much do you need? Thank you.
You'll see why. Now, last time I did this, one lady told me she wasn't comfortable with me touching her. I'm like, technically I'm not touching you, but I guess it. This one's nice. This one. No, it's great. Didn't step back into there. No. I'll get Judy to do it. She can do something. Okay. So, here, let's give it. Why do you think I did that? That's besides the point. So, if you're one of my congregants, let's hold those comments till later. Separating? Why?
Because that's what would happen if we flee, if we were to flee. Most likely a lot of people would get separated.
Yeah. And if you notice, most of you who came together are separated by the table. So, for the rest of the lecture and the discussion, pretend you literally cannot touch the person you came with. And this is just for a few minutes. Imagine when people go months, years, decades without being able to connect with their loved ones. How would that make you feel? You would suffer, right? Emotionally, spiritually, you would suffer. Now, I could have put one around Jason, just wrapped him around. But I didn't. And see, and Judy wasn't sitting next to Don, otherwise I would have separated them.
It's okay.
Okay. But you get it, right? Now, imagine you have a child or children, and they're on the other side of that. How does that make you feel? What crosses your mind about that? The adults, it's different, right? We have a little bit more of understanding now. But that's a child who's just coming into the world, into their own. Have that. I can tell you that they might not have it, but they develop it rather quickly. It forces that child to grow up too fast, robbing them of their childhood. And those of you who have raised a child, whether your own or grandchild or niece, nephew, whatever, what would that feel like? Seeing that child go through that trauma. Or being where they caught your child when you were fleeing into this country and you're way over there because you got separated, and then they send your child back. And you're not aware of it until later. Now, some folks are quick to just say, well, how the hell don't you know where your child is? Well, I would say, get into one of those groups who are so desperate who cross into our country undocumented. And tell me if it's that easy. See, my husband and I, when we lived back in South Texas, we saw a truck pulled over on the side of the road. And a lot of South Texas is kind of dry and branchy like in some areas. And you just saw the truck go, the bed of the truck. And you're like, well, because there's a whole bunch of folks getting into the bed of the truck. That was the other part of the failures on that side. That's not always the case. And I promise you, the stars are going to come into play. And at that point, Judy can maybe turn on the lights. Don't worry, we still have some light from the hallway if you're scared of the dark. You should not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. Exodus. See, how many times do we not do that? So many times. Whether it's the average citizen or whether it's a politician. And yet we continue to vote these politicians into office. And we still claim we're Christians. We're this, we're that, and we believe in God, and we go to church. Well, where are you practicing what you're supposedly being preached on? And if you're not being preached on these things, maybe you're in the wrong church community. See, I show you some of these. Operation Condor is one of them. That's when the scoop against Chilean president. Because oftentimes, we as citizens do not recognize the major hand in the cookie jar that our government has, especially in Latin America, that they support these coups. Okay? It tells you right there, with support of the U.S. Reagan was one that was very important in making a lot of those things happen. See, I know there's often times we say, oh, Reagan was the best president we've had so far. Depends who you ask. Same thing with President Obama. Depends who you ask. Yes, he did a lot of good stuff. But up to that point, President Obama was also the one who had deported the most immigrants, or undocumented immigrants. And then we know President Trump did a lot more than that. And Biden hasn't exactly slowed down either. So it's not really a political party issue. It's a human issue. And if you think about it, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican president, they all do it. But when they're campaigning, what do they tell you? We've got to help them. And once in their office, so they can continue to be in the office, what do? Let's get them out. See? Humble. That's a lot of the culture. And if you travel to Latin America, you know it can be as simple as that. And we're destroying that. How many of you remember in the 80s where El Salvador had big exodus of people migrating to the U.S. or to other places? Any of you? You're not familiar with him as Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was assassinated literally as he was celebrating a mass. Walked in there, shot him in the middle of the service. How is that humane? He was fighting for justice, for social justice. And because the right-wing government didn't want to have anything with that, they silenced him permanently. So what do you do when you think that even clergy are not touchable? They are. Clergy in this country have also been blacklisted for going and being at the border, looking at things, bringing attention to it, speaking out against it. And it's interfaith clergy. It's not just Christian clergy. How is that right? When they're speaking against social justice, a lack of So the first one who was put on trial for providing sanctuary was Reverend Jon Fife. He was a member of the original sanctuary movement. So it started at Southside Presbyterian Church in Arizona. Do you know where the second one was? Can you guess what denomination was the second one? U.C.C. And it was down the street. Wellington Avenue Church in the city was the second one in the country to open sanctuary. If you're not familiar with sanctuary is, it's basically where an individual who's undocumented goes and finds sanctuary in a sanctuary. And they live there anywhere from a few days to a few years. In Evanston, there was a family who were living at First Baptist, I want to say, but they had an apartment where it used to be the original parsonage, and that's where the family was living until they were able to get documentation to be legally in the country. The mom with the two sons, while her daughter was incarcerated in one of the detention camps in Texas. And there was a big campaign to reunite her with her family. And church communities came together and it happened. See, there's the power of Christian communities, Muslim communities, Jewish communities. Any religious organization that really puts their mind to work for helping the less fortunate, it can make it happen. It's not just about politics. These are families. And if we're preaching a certain thing that we believe, that we go to church or synagogue or temple, whatever, and we're claiming that we're so religious, so faithful, then why are we doing this to people? That's not humane. See, there were still questions about the legality of sanctuary. As I told you, Reverend Jon was put into trial, for harboring undocumented immigrants. Thankfully, he didn't end up in jail. Can you guess another reason why he probably didn't go to jail? Anybody take a shot at it?
Church U.C.C. religion.
That's part of it.
Bad press.
There you go.
Yeah.
Bad press for the government. You really think the government wants bad press of saying they prosecuted a reverend because he was trying to do the good Christian thing? I know in Michigan, I think it was Michigan or Wisconsin, where something similar happened. And they were putting up to court. We're not immune to those things. But it's important to know, because of bad press, there are times where they're not going to touch it. In Hyde Park, University Church had someone in there in sanctuary because he was in a car accident. He was undocumented, so he's going to be deported. And he held in there for a long time. Think about it. That's all that you can do, is just be in that one building. It's a house arrest. How would you feel if the only place you could go was your house? You can't leave your house. And you certainly can't go to the front yard, because then ICE can easily pick you up. What do you do? Sir families, same thing with her. She had a minor traffic violation. They fought, and our government said, you know what? We'll give you permission to stay. She was able to stay. So, what would you do to ensure your family's safety when you are limited in resources? What would you do? Judy or Jacob, can you hit the lights? Okay.
I don't know if this does anything.
What if you just hold it roll it dimmer? No. Well, that's not gonna work.
Are there any switches behind you?
No. It's just for the screen and that. Okay. Well, I don't want to keep you on it, but let's go. So imagine, close your eyes. And all you see is a moon and a dark sky. You're in South Texas, Arizona, wherever you want. Now, the little star that you have, it might be the only light besides the moon that you see in that darkness. You can barely see the other folks around you that are traveling with you. Now imagine you're a child. And I don't mean a teenager. I mean a little one. 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. How would you feel going through these fields, through these branches, where all you see, the only light you might see is the moon and the stars? What would that do to you? Even today as an adult, do you like to walk in the darkness? Yeah.
I'm tempted to press this button and see.
Oh, there.
Okay.
There you go.
Almost got everything. You can do it again.
I would turn off the screen, but I don't want to mess with that. But those of you who are in a darker area, you might see it, and if you cover it, you'll see the. That's all you have. So those are for you to keep. Not I'm going to ask them for them back. But as you keep them, I want it to serve as a reminder of part of the journey that not just undocumented immigrants, refugees, documented immigrants, think about it in the sense where that's always been my carry is just the image of this guy following them. These, Rio Grande Valley is where I'm from, which is furthest deep Texas you can get. So I was born in Brownsville, raised in Laredo. And people was like, oh, is that around San Antonio? No, that's still further south. San Antonio is not the end of Texas. So it took us a day to leave Texas. This happens a little too often. But I'll show you the next one. That not all Border Patrol are jerks, to put it mildly. These guys actually carry gallons of water. Because yes, they have to do their job, right? That's the job they signed up for. But they remember the humanity in people. They could have just arrested them and thrown them in. They're giving them water. Again, South Texas is one of the killer places, literally, because heat can get up to 115, 117. And if the only water you see in branches, you know that that's not good water to drink. Some are tempted, and they do drink it out of so much thirst. What happens then is, of course, their stomach has that after effect, and some will die from dehydration because of that water that they drank, and now their system is sick. Think about that. How would that make you feel? Most of us right now, like, I'm usually carrying my cup with me for church, because I'll drink out of it quite often. Didn't bring it today because I didn't want it to be a distraction. But most of you can just go out into the vending machine or the water fountain or wherever and just get clean water. They can't. And it's part of the journey where they just want you to have a better future. Many things, like I said earlier, undocumented immigration is crime, gangs. Yes, just like anything, there is a small percentage. Clergy. How many times have you seen the news, read the newspaper, heard on the radio that there's a pastor, whether denominational or not, who sexually assaulted a child, who sexually assaulted a female congregant, who embezzled money? Take your pick of any profession. We're not any different. Just like we cannot compile that all immigrants, especially undocumented, are full of gangsters and criminals. See, and that's the area where, if you understand this, you need to speak up when someone tries to come with that rhetoric. Now, there are times, and we all know, that you can talk to the person, you can listen to them, but at the end of the day, they're not going to change their mind. They don't want to hear what you have to say. And that's okay. That's the beauty of having different people. But it's not healthy for those that we do not see as humans. Could you live seeing your child, your grandchild, your niece, your nephew in that situation? Those are like the astronaut blankets. I call them the foil blankets. I know they're meant to be helping with warmth and everything, but do you actually want a child sleeping with that on the floor in cages? Supposedly it's improved. Do you really think it's improved that much? Or do you think that it's been phased out because right now that's not the thing to cover in the news? It's a rhetoric, but they're not necessarily covering that part of it. See? Look at that little one. I see images like that and I think they're fine. He's 5. Granted, that probably wouldn't be him until about 2 in the morning. But that would be him at some point. But not sleeping with an American Red Cross blanket. What do we do? See, these are the 2 different things. This is Japanese concentration camps. Some of you may be young enough to remember that. Some of you maybe weren't around. And then we have detention centers, particularly in Texas. See a similarity? Or am I just full of it? See? And this is actually one of the nicer looking ones. The one from Italy. See, when I mentioned about border crossings, there is a reverend and professor out of Austin, Gregory Cuellar. Especially a few years ago when all this started, he went along the border, talking to the different families, talking to the different kids. He came to do a lecture at Garrett when I was a student, and he displayed all the artwork from the kids. So I'm someone who's learned little by little that it's okay to cry in public. It's probably my machismo growing up, and it was not instilled by my dad, because my dad didn't teach me those things. It was just, I guess, part of the culture. I shed tears during that lecture. One, because I can resonate there, right? A lot of them are Latino, right? Brown skin. I share that cultural perspective. But what hit me was one drawing of a little girl that she had a makeshift raft with herself, her mom, and a coyote. And right above was a little cross. And he asked her, "What's that?" And of course in Spanish, she's like, "Oh, that's Diosito," right? God, just protecting us. But what happens in these centers is that our government allows them to have the religious items removed from them. Which, if you study some wars, those are tactics that are used in wars. Their rosaries, their Bibles. We know for our Muslim siblings, similar to those things. Those religious artifacts are taken. Why? To make them suffer. Takes away some of them. Early back in 50s, these are Mexicans. Whether they're Mexican citizens who came here for an immigrant program, or whether they're Chicanos, which is a Mexican American. They were deported. An Operation Wetback. Because they felt we need to do that. There's too many of them. And there's, of course, other aspects to it. But think about that. They deported citizens of the country just because they were part of that ethnicity. There hasn't been justice. We obviously don't get it because generation after generation, we're committing the same things. Trauma, stressors, before, during, after. Before, as I said, financial issues, sense of failure. They want to escape violence, right? Whether it's from gangs or the government. They want to escape that. Poverty. They feel, well, if I make that effort, maybe I'll have a chance. Political oppression. Again, if you study Latin America, our government has had a big grasp on so many of those civil wars. But of course, at the end of the day, oh no, I don't know what you're doing. During the experienced violence, environmental hazards, rattlesnakes, South Texas, right? Literal coyotes. You imagine whatever is out there in wildlife that can hurt you, where you have nothing to defend yourself with, it's going to hurt you. And then after, limited resources, you're taken advantage of, right? Say, oh, I'll hire you, Holly, but you know what? I'm not going to pay you minimum wage here because you're not a citizen. I'm just going to pay you, $5 an hour. Does $5 an hour really help? No. That's not going to help much, especially if you have a family. And it's not that you're not trying. I will say that in case you didn't know, there are a lot of undocumented immigrants who do pay into our tax system because they get an ID in a sense, where they pay into it. They're just not able to file for a return like we are. But it's part of the process because if they want to become a U.S. citizen or a resident alien, they have to prove they're trying to be as honest as possible. So they don't get a return on that. How would you feel if you, well, let's face it, some of us don't get a return. But those of you who do, how would you feel if moving forward you were just not going to get a return anymore? Some of us look forward to that, right? Even if it's a few bucks, we're like, yeah, I can go out to dinner. So I want you to think of that. So here comes the time where we discuss. Is there anything new you learned? How did it make you feel? How does a tape make you feel? Don't all yell at the same time.
So I didn't realize that the U.S. citizens were going other places.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah. And undocumented because they'll go with their visa and they expired and they stay there. And they use their social security checks from this country to live comfortably.
Apart from our southern border friends trying to come into this country, the statistic used to be, and I think you could bear this out, Jason, there used to be 50 million refugees throughout the world. Like I know right now, 25 million refugees throughout the world. Those are political or economic or religious folks who are persecuting one way or another. 50,000 only were allowed into this country at any given time. That's a very, very small percentage of folks from around the world who are living in tents and living day to day. And in order to even be able to be improved is years in the making. I have one of my nieces married a man from Kenya, but it took him 3 or 4 years and many interviews before he was allowed to come to this country.
And thousands of dollars.
And thousands of dollars. She traveled many times to Kenya. And he had an education, and he was a professional soccer player, so he was able to sell something that was needed in this country, but just to do it legally was many years and lots of money.
Yeah. And here's another question is, why is it that our southern border is fortified in a sense, and not our northern border?
Because the northern is white.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. In South Texas, as I said, I'm adopted, but my birth family, a lot of my ancestors are buried in a small little cemetery. Well, now the border fence keeps them on the Mexican side of the fence, even though it's still Texas land, and on this side of the river, it's on that side of the fence. Ranches, there was one ranch back home where it was set on fire, right? Fire came about. Firefighters couldn't get to it in time because they had to go to the nearest fence opening because the ranch was on that side of the fence. Couldn't get there in time. How would you feel about your home being like that? And that's not counting the natural habitats that it's destroying. And it comes back to a bias, right? Northern border is white. Southern border is not. And even the southern border, yes, majority are brown bodies, right? But I will, in case you don't know, Latinos, we come literally in every shade and color.
Right.
From the lightest to the darkest, right? We're muds, right? Just to say any of my raza that I said that. Well, my husband, for example, is not as dark as I am, and we're both Latino. Both Mexican ancestry, right? We come literally the whole shade. So some of the folks who come through the southern border are not just from Latin America, but they don't give us much of those statistics. They come from all over the world. Why? It's easier to go through the south, supposedly. Any other thoughts, questions? Enlightenment?
I think when you say, like, we should try to call it out when prejudice is being expressed, etc., I'm sure other people would probably feel the same way that I do. I don't feel informed enough to answer with the rebuttal. You know, the very common one is, of course, when Europeans were coming here, and we could go through the whole list, right, as who was the low man on the totem pole,
Right.
Italians, then Irish, then whatever.
Yeah.
But they were coming legally, and all of these people aren't coming legally.
Right.
I don't feel informed enough to respond to that, other than to go back to they're still our brothers and sisters.
Right.
How do you know that that isn't an angel? How do you know that that's not Jesus Christ standing in front of you? But is there a way, an easy way, to become more informed about that fact? And for instance, I don't know, when they're busing these refugees to all different parts of the country, at what point are those people becoming legal or documented?
Right. So one is the Pew Research website that you could go to. And the other one is finding nonprofits that have concrete information that will give you statistics. Because there are other websites that if you don't know if it's a trusted source,
Right.
you shouldn't use, right? So honestly, you can't just kind of get a whole chunk of information right away, right? Even today, I don't know all of it, but I probably have a colleague who knows way more. Like I know Jason knows way more about refugees and that process than I do, right? But I can speak more to what I've witnessed myself as a Latino from South Texas, right? And what I've seen, right? Well, one of them, you don't necessarily have to be super informed when you hear a racist comment at the grocery store, right? And yes, we can imagine they might be an immigrant, right? They say, hey, that's not okay. You don't have to defend of, well, they're coming here and taking all of our stuff. No, say they're a human being. Look at them for what they are, human, and have respect. So that could be a one way where you could, in a sense, kind of like, I'm not going there because I don't know all that information, but I'm standing up, as a faithful person and saying, okay, that's not okay, right? Because what would happen if the Holy Family was coming in through the South right now? They'd end up like some of those kids, right? Engaged. And let's face it, most of us who are Christians wouldn't be Christians. And at the same time, when you have Christians who are hateful towards our Jewish siblings, I don't know if they know, but we follow a Jewish guy. So, yes, we're Christians because Jesus Christ. Jesus is a Jew. So how can we spew hate? Right? Just like Palestine and Israel. We've heard a lot of our politicians, it's like, we should just kill them out. Again, why is it that Ukraine is fully supported? Palestinians are not. North, south. And I'm not going to say that all of our Jewish siblings support that, because there's a lot. I've even seen rabbis, right, throughout this country speaking out against it. It says that is not the way. So we can't say it's all Jewish people, just like we're not supposed to be, because we don't know. I won't mention the name or point them out, but I'm sure they'll know who I'm talking about. Is our congregation regularly on Sunday has a Jewish lady who goes to church with us every Sunday. And she keeps coming back. Why? A sense of community and the messages that she's receiving. So I could be like other clergy and be behind the pulpit and say, we need to support Israel and just let them kill them all. Because there are some clergy who've done that, right? Just let them get rid of it. They're all criminals. They're all terrorists. You're telling me that countless, thousands and thousands of children? No. Right? And some say, well, you're defending them, so you must be, anti-Semitic. No. But can I call out the injustice that's happening there? Yes, there's an injustice when Jewish folks were captured and killed. We get that. That was not acceptable. But neither is the genocide. Just like it was not acceptable when our Jewish siblings went through what they did with Hitler. And Palestinians were one of the ones that opened the door. But it doesn't matter what society it is. We keep on repeating that cycle. And to your comment of that Europeans coming here, but if you ask our indigenous siblings, they say, no, everybody got here illegally. Right? Like, we would say they were here legally because the government was established, but whose line was it first? That's kind of what's happening. Right? Any thoughts, questions, arguments you don't agree on? I'm open to those too. Well, I thank you all for coming out, especially if you've got a little bit of rain on you. So I hope you will join us for our next one. It's not part 2, it's just lecture 2. Judy has some copies of the flyers out there. You don't have to register. It's encouraged only because you see how small the room is. You don't have to register. It's just a preference, just so that we kind of try to have a good count. By all means, if you like goodies, there's a pen and some magnets with our information. And if there's anything that, if you're part of a church community in Des Plaines, doesn't have to be Christian. 3 of my colleagues and I have tried to reignite a clergy cluster where we continue to meet together and try to get our faith communities to do stuff like we're supposed to as churches. This last weekend, we volunteered with the Earth Day with Clean Up Gift Bank. So my colleagues and I were out there with some of our congregants. So I encourage you to find ways to get involved and encourage your clergy to open their emails because I do reach out to them or my colleagues, or I've sent a couple of hard letters, but either one, you can toss that one in the trash and you might just delete your email. So I encourage you to encourage your clergy to, see what is it that they're doing, right? Maybe they're doing other stuff that you're not familiar with. So, but thank you. Have a good night. Drive safely. And you can jump over the tape now.